Welcome to this Zoom talk entitled Privacy, Surveillance and the Internet, to be given by our guest speaker, Bruce Schneier. The talk is hosted by the United Nations Association Harpenden Group. My name is Suhail Shahryar. I'm the chair of the Harpenden Group. For those who haven't heard of the United Nations Association, it's a worldwide federation of country-based association of local community groups supporting the goals and causes of the United Nations. The Harpenden Group has been in existence since 1947. Harpenden is a small parish town in the county of Hertfordshire, bordering London to the north. To know more about the UNA and about the Harpenden Group, please visit our website, www.tinyurl.com/UNA-Harpenden, or email us on una.harpenden@gmail.com. If you're wondering what's the connection between the UN and the internet, well, the UN strongly believes that everyone has the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through the internet. The 21st century is arguably the beginning of the information age. But in just 25 years, we are not only seeing our privacy being under threat, the information and ideas we receive over the internet are themselves under threat due to disinformation and deception employed by powerful and privileged state and corporate actors, as well as those from the criminal world. These portend worse consequences on our daily social and political lives. I first came across Bruce about 25 years ago at a security conference in London. Dr. Eugene Schultz, a senior colleague of mine, introduced me to Bruce. Bruce stood out not just because he had long hair then, I think he still has it now, but as a cryptographer, he was the author of a highly popular book called Applied Cryptography, first published in 1996. The best way to describe Bruce is that he is a public interest technologist working at the intersection of security, technology, and people. Bruce has been writing about security issues in his monthly blog and in a free newsletter called Cryptogram since 1998, which I still subscribe to. He has written many books, and I've read several of them. Data and Goliath is my favorite. Its subject matter is what today's talk is about. Bruce is currently a fellow and lecturer of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School in Cambridge, Massachusetts. He is talking to us from the USA. Bruce's talk will be about 25 minutes, and it will be followed by a Q&A session. You may submit your questions via the chat function anytime during the talk. Either Bruce or I will select which questions he will answer. The Zoom session should end no later than 9 p.m. GMT or 4 p.m. EST. Just before he starts, a quick plug about our next public talk, which will be on January 21st. Professor Jennifer Jackson-Priest of the London School of Economics will be giving a talk on the international protection of minorities from the League to the UN. This will be held at the Salvation Army Hall in Harpenden. So without further ado, I give you Bruce Schneier. I will now unmute you, Bruce.
I am muted, which is like a total rookie mistake at the end of 2022. It's embarrassing.
I can hear you.
But I have an excuse. I was just diagnosed. I got with COVID this morning. Hooray.
Wow.
So far, it's very mild, and I seem to have normal energy. But if I start swaying, you will understand what's going on. Thanks for the introduction. The only correction I have is I wrote my first book in 1993.
Wow.
Which is kind of scary that it was almost 30 years ago. It is almost hard to imagine that the changes between 93 and today. And a lot of the changes are not due to changes in math or changes in security, but they're changes in how we use technology. And that's what I want to talk about. Data is very much a byproduct of the information society. Everything we do that involves a computer creates a transaction record of what happened. Browsing the internet using or even just carrying one of these phones, making a purchase online with a credit card, walking by an IoT sensor, saying something in the same room as an Alexa, walking by one of the millions of security cameras. All of these things creates data about what happened. Data is also a byproduct of any socialization we do that involves the internet. Phone calls, emails, text messages, Facebook chatter, this Zoom, there's a record somewhere of the date, the time, and all of our accounts because we're on it. And this data is increasingly stored and increasingly searchable. Right? Data over the past 30 years since I wrote that book, data storage has been getting cheaper, data processing has been getting cheaper. That I used to, in the 90s, sort my email. Right? I had hundreds of email boxes, each with somebody's name or a project. Right? I curated my email. I stopped doing that I remember the year, it was 2007. For me, for email, in 2007, search became cheaper than sort. It was easier to have one big email box and just search what I needed. That basic change has happened with everything over those 3 decades. Right? And culminating today in things like ChatGPT, which is basically an enormous search of everything on the internet. And the result is we are all leaving this digital exhaust as we go through our lives. This isn't a question of malice on anybody's part. It's simply a natural byproduct of how computers work. Also, our nature of data use has changed. We used to save data for historical reasons, to remember what we said or what we did, to verify our actions with some third party, to let future generations know what we thought, our papers. Now data drives future decision-making. This is the fundamental promise of big data. Give us all your data and we'll help you make better decisions. And all of this data is fundamentally surveillance data. Right? It's metadata. It's data about data. I don't know if you remember 2014, Snowden, a lot of debates about metadata versus data. Data is what we think of as data, right? Text. Metadata is data the system needs to operate. So for a cell phone, the data would be the conversation, the voice conversation I have. The metadata is my phone number, your phone number, the date, the time, our locations. Right? Email. The data is the text of the email. The metadata is the from, to, the date, the time. We can argue about the subject. For this Zoom call, the data is this. The metadata is all of our accounts and when this call is put up. Now, metadata is fundamentally surveillance data. So you think about it, if I hired a private detective and asked them to eavesdrop on you, that they would probably, I'm going to make this up. They'll put a bug in your home, in your office, in your car. They'll collect the conversations you have. That's the data. But if I asked that same detective to put you under surveillance, I'd get a different kind of report. I get a report of where you went, who you interacted with, what you purchased, what you saw. That's all metadata. Metadata is surveillance data. And in a lot of ways, it's much more important than conversation content. It tracks relationships and associations. It shows what we're interested in, who's important to us. Metadata really reveals who we are. We never lie to our search engines. Right? I used to say that Google knows more about me than my wife does, but that's actually not really true. Google knows more about me than I do, because it never forgets. And metadata is easier to store, to search, to analyze. And we are living in the golden age of surveillance, right? It's incidental. It's a side effect of using the computerized devices we want to use. It's covert. You don't see the dozens of internet trackers that are watching everything you do when you browse, but they're there. You don't see the thousands of cameras you walk by as you go about your day in the city, but they're there. It's hard to opt out of. I mean, we can't not use a credit card. It just doesn't work in 2022 society. I don't use Gmail. I deliberately don't want Google to have all my email, but Google has about half of my email because you all use Gmail. And it's ubiquitous. It's happening to all of us, and it's happening to us everywhere because everything is computerized. And ubiquitous surveillance is fundamentally different. It's not follow that car, it's follow every car. You can do a lot more things when you can follow every car. You can do surveillance backwards in time. You're storing all the data, follow the cars of last week. You could do hop searches. You could do about searches. We saw this, some of the NSA documents. I can search not just who you talk to, but who they talk to and who they talk to. Try to find conspiracies. I can search based on topic. I can look for people based on different surveillance characteristics. Right? Find me someone who's been at this intersection on these 3 dates and times. I can do that. Right? I can put in all sorts of predefined criteria. It's a great NSA surveillance program where, man, this is just fantastic. They look for pairs of phones coming towards each other who turn themselves off. So the phone is turned off. And then the phone is turned on again about an hour later as the phones are moving away from each other. They're looking for secret meetings. And this is all done by computers. Right? This is not surveillance by people. People just see the results the computers spit out. So this data is largely being collected and used by corporations. Right? Surveillance is the business model of the internet. We build systems that spy on people in exchange for services. I actually have no idea if Zoom sells the information that we are all in meetings together, but they might. But lots of systems are free and they sell your data. They are free and they monetize your data. I mean, this was originally done for efficiency reasons. You know, back in the late 90s, there was no obvious way to charge for internet services. People expected the internet to be free because it was free until the late 90s. So the advertising model was glommed onto as the only one that'll work. That turns into the personalized advertising model because it collided with the huge data broker industry, which came out of mail order, right? Junk mail. You would get junk mail based on you being in certain interest groups. So these data brokers were used to slicing and dicing us based on geography or interests or what magazines you subscribe to or any kind of demographics. They had a large database of personal information already that was fed into the internet, huge database. And the result is sites that make their money spying on you. Right? Google and Facebook are the prime examples. The joke is if you're not the customer, you're the product. But actually, even when you are the customer, you're also the product. Lots of products and services that you buy also spy on you. And this data is incredibly valuable. Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, they're the most valuable companies in the world. And the twin drivers here are free and convenient. And this data is collected for the purposes of psychological manipulation. Because advertising is the other business model of the internet. So we have propaganda, psychological manipulation, personalized ads, personalized offers, personalized psychological manipulation. I mean, the goal here is to manipulate you into buying something. And that's what all these advertisers are paying for. They're not giving Google money for nothing. They're giving Google money because they can convince you to spend even more money. And corporations know an amazing amount about us. Right? Our cell phones reveal where we are at all times, where we live, where we work, who we spend time with. And these companies can make very powerful inferences about us. Political affiliation is easy. Sexual affiliation is easy. Mood a little harder. Social connections, they're easy. If you think about where you are right now, who knows that you're there? Cell phone companies, sure, that's easy. If you use Google Maps to get there, Google knows. Any smartphone apps you use that use location? No. Maybe you use an Uber. If you're somewhere commercial, use your credit card, that pins you. ATM machine nearby, security camera, license plate capture. All of these things, all these companies, and that's just location. So government surveillance has largely piggybacked on these same capabilities. And the NSA, we know, uses internet cookies, uses our logins, uses cell phone location data. It's not that the NSA woke up one morning and decided to spy on everyone. They realized that corporations were spying on everyone and decided to get themselves a copy. Whether it's through purchase, legal compulsion, coercion, theft, depending on the country, depending on the law. And this, in general, lets the government get away with a level of surveillance we would have never allowed for otherwise. Right? We would not carry government tracking devices, but we carry our cell phone. We would never alert the police when we make a new friend, but we alert Facebook. We would never give the government a copy of all of our correspondence, but we do give it to Gmail. And governments know that, and governments use that. Government largely conducts surveillance because of fear, right? Fear of terrorists or criminals in the US, fear of dissidents, fear of new ideas in other countries. And ubiquitous surveillance is very effective at social control, and less so at law enforcement, but it's very good at social control. China is a premier example of that. And then the nature of surveillance, I'm going to use the NSA because they're the kind of big dog here, changed about the same time we started producing lots of data. So the NSA's history, born during the Cold War, right? There's a voyeuristic interest in the Soviet Union because the norm. They collected a lot of data, some of it useful and some of it not. And it was largely tied to the Cold War. Hang on, I got to read. NSA is National Security Agency. Yes, I don't know anybody. Okay, let everyone do that. So the Cold War wanes in the 80s, 90s. Surveillance got a new lease on life after the terrorist attacks of September 11th. Because in the US, the intelligence community got the impossible mission of never again. And the actually ridiculous goal of preventing something from happening means we need to know everything that happens. We need to watch, when the enemy could be anyone anywhere, you need to watch everyone everywhere. So surveillance moved from government on government espionage to government on people surveillance. From targeted surveillance to bulk surveillance. At the same time, the nature of communications changed. In the Cold War, communications channels were separate. Right? If you were listening on, some, submarine control channel in Moscow and Vladivostok, you're not going to accidentally listen to, people living in New York. But the internet changes that as well. Right? There's one global communications infrastructure. Cloud computing means there's one data storage infrastructure. So everything is in the same place. You also have the rise of government espionage, and lots have been written about cyber weapons arms manufacturers, right? Companies like Pegasus that basically provide nation-state spyware to countries that you actually don't want to have it. Ron Diebert wrote a great article in Foreign policy like just yesterday on this, so I urge you to read it. So what you have is a public-private surveillance partnership. Governments leveraging corporate data collection and also leveraging just corporate data stuff. Corporations mining government databases. There's a lot of private corporations support government surveillance. Contractors, technology providers. And while there are some breaks in this partnership, largely the interests of governments and corporations are aligned, right? It's power against us. All right, so why does this matter? It matters a lot. In that book was mentioned in the start, David and Goliath, I spent the entire second section on why this matters. And I talk about political liberty and justice, right? How we can be accused by data. The United States, there have been stories recently on people arrested just based on photo databases. And data quality actually matters a lot here. For most advertising applications, a large error rate's okay. And if I profile you wrong, I show you an ad for a car you don't want to buy, so what? For government uses, not so much. I profile you wrong, and I arrest you by mistake. So we're having censorship based on surveillance in many countries, and then chilling effects based on that. Then we know that if there is censorship, there's surveillance, people self-censor. Certainly in affected communities. That inhibits dissent and social change. There's secrecy, creep, abuse. There are problems of commercial fairness and equality. We see lots of surveillance-based discrimination, surveillance-based manipulation, privacy breaches. This matters for reasons of business competitiveness. Companies are hurt by both government and corporate surveillance. This matters for reasons of security. If everyone's allowed to spy, we are in an insecure world. And of course, it matters for privacy. Right? Privacy matters to all of us because it's about autonomy. It's about the ability for us to determine how we present ourselves to the world. Instead of things being known about us without our knowledge or consent. So there's a lot here. Let me go a little bit and where I think we have to fix it. I think there are important principles here. One is security and privacy. You hear a lot of rhetoric about security versus privacy, that somehow privacy is opposite to security. It's kind of ridiculous. If you think about security measures, a locked door, tall fence, lots of security has nothing to do with privacy. And in a sense, privacy is essential for security. So they need to go together. Security over surveillance, that we need to live in a world where the defense dominates, right? As long as this object is in the pocket of every single elected official and CEO and head of state and nuclear power plant operator and judge and police officer and voting official, this needs to be as secure as possible, which means protecting it from surveillance. We need better transparency. The US has tried a lot of secret laws, they failed. We need more transparency into what is being done, both government and corporate, and better oversight and better accountability. One world, one network, one answer. Either security for everyone or security for no one. Either everyone gets to spy or no one gets to spy. So there's a lot here. I talk about different laws and different rules, but social change is real important. We need to get over fear. We need to value privacy. And that's happening very slowly. And in a sense, I have a really important question here. How do we design systems that benefit society as a whole while at the same time protecting people individually? And I think this is a fundamental issue of the information age. But our data together has enormous value to us collectively. Our data apart has enormous value to us individually. Right? Data in the group interest versus data in the individual interest. the societal benefits of big data versus the individual risks of personal data. Now, I mean, lots of examples of this, right? Movement data. I use Waze when I drive, right? Waze is a navigation program that gives me real-time information about traffic. It's great. I love it. But it's based on surveillance. The reason Waze knows the traffic is that everyone using it is being surveilled. How do we deal with that? And I can produce answers. Behavioral data for advertising. I mean, Google's bargain to you is, I will give you an enormous number of free services, but I also want to show you ads that I think are relevant to you. Interesting proposition. We need to talk about it. The NSA's bargain is a little bit different. Let us spy on you, let us spy on everybody, and we'll keep you safe. Or medical data. I think there's going to be enormous value in all of us putting our data into one big database and letting researchers add it. But that's incredibly personal. How do we do that? And there are a bunch of examples for ways stored for 10 minutes, right? Anonymize it. For medical data, protect it, right? Make sure anybody looking at it has signed agreements. But we can make up all sorts of different answers. But basically, data is the pollution problem of the information age. I mean, think about it. All computer processes produce it. It stays around, festering. How we deal with it, how we reuse it, how we recycle it, who has access to it, how we dispose of it, what laws regulate it, is central to how the information age functions. And I believe that just as we look back on the early decades of the industrial age and wonder how society could ignore pollution in their rush to build that world, our grandchildren will look back at us during these early decades of the information age and judge us on how we dealt with rebalancing the power resulting from all of this new data. So thank you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Bruce. We have one question, and others, please feel free to put your question.
So I'll read it. I see a question from Roger. Basically, why don't the police and regulatory authorities catch more criminals than people evading the law? No idea, but it's not because of data. You know, I mean, there's a couple of reasons, right? I mean, catching rich criminals is nothing police want to do. I'm sure there are manpower shortages. It is never data. I mean, it's not that if they can spy on everybody, they can catch more criminals. That's basically a bullshit argument you hear from police. But when you dig into police data, it's just not true.
In your book, Data and Goliath, you talked about how difficult it is to home in on a particular target using the data. You know, for example, find Osama bin Laden. Why did it take so long? Things like that. Is there something about the data that makes it difficult to pinpoint things?
You know, I mean, there have been changes. I mean, I wrote that book in 2014. So it's been 8 years. And now it's easier. Now, so Osama bin Laden's a special case. He took pains not to be digital. Right? He didn't have a phone. He didn't have a computer. He'd communicate through courier on paper. People who visited him didn't bring their phones with them. I mean, he took very extreme measures, the kind of measures that, like, for you and I would be impossible. You know, like living in the woods in a cabin with no electricity. You know, we wouldn't do it. Now it is much easier to find individual people because we broadcast. This is the best surveillance device ever been created. Right? It is constantly broadcasting who you are and where you are. Not because it's nefarious, because it can't work any other way. Right? This phone has to know who it is, and it has to tell the cell tower a block away where it is, or otherwise it can't ring when you call me. So finding individuals now is very easy because we all are using so many devices that have surveillance built in when we use them naturally.
Another question from Richard.
So it's a should question. I said I don't use Gmail. It's true. Should we be using DuckDuckGo, Brave, Firefox for preference? So this is a hard question to answer. Should is hard. I'll make a confession. I play Pokemon Go. That is a surveillance-based game on my phone. Should I do that? Who knows? Right? We all make our choices. We all make our trade-offs. It's pretty much impossible to avoid surveillance. I tend to like to use DuckDuckGo first, but I'll be honest with you, Google gives better results. I'll use DuckDuckGo first. If I don't like the results, I'll go to Google. So it's a question. Do you want to accept inferior search results for more privacy? You can, but you can decide not to, and I'm not going to fault you. We are all making our own decisions, but the business model is so ubiquitous, you can't leave it. I'm also not on Facebook, which makes me a freak, but highly productive. But, I don't get invited to parties because of it. Being on Facebook, some of us need for our careers, for our families, for our friends. So there's no one answer to those should questions. And I'm not a privacy absolutist. And that's really important. Question resident about differential privacy. Differential privacy works great. It is a tool. It works in some instances, also to save the technical details. But there are times it's valuable, there are times it isn't. For example, we're using it in the US Census. Because in the US Census, it's all about aggregation and not about individuals. The differential privacy is valuable, and it's a valuable tool for maintaining anonymity with something like a census. For medical privacy, it'll make no sense because the individual matters a lot. So, like any privacy tool, it'll have value, but it won't be a panacea.
Can I ask about artificial intelligence, AI?
You can. Are you an AI or are you a person?
Well, one of the key
things, we'll all notice he refused to answer that question.
One of the key things is the aligning the AI algorithms to human values. That's my understanding. If it deviates from that, you might get AI entities, which have happened, I believe, I hear, I read, which then go off on their own sweet way, which could be contrary to human values, moral decision making and so forth. Typical thing is the bridge, and throwing one person off the bridge in front of a train to stop it rather than others. That kind of exercise, of moral exercise. The computer would decide on the most efficient, but not necessarily the most moral decision. So what are your views? I know that's straying a little bit from surveillance, but surveillance surely links in with all this.
It does. And, humans aren't very good at morality either. So, I'm not convinced we'll be held up as a paragon of morality that AIs will fail to meet. And I think that's important, right? Because I don't know if we're going to be able to hold AIs up to standards that we humans can't meet or it makes sense to. I tend to think a lot of that is moral panic and overblown. So the word for this is value alignment. How to make sure that algorithms match our values. And the examples are pretty interesting and also kind of gross. We've had AIs that we've had an AI used in the United States for making bail and parole decisions that routinely would rate people of color as riskier. We've had AIs for hiring. Amazon used one that routinely rate women as a worse hire. These are not existential problems, but they are important problems. So, and here's the issue. We have an AI that's a racist. Now, it turns out people are racists. And people are also pretty opaquely racist. The Los Angeles Police Department is known to be racist. I can't cut open any policeman's brain and look what's going on inside, and neither can any judge or court. but we can look at the results. So I think we are paying attention to the results of AI. If you played with ChatGPT, you hit some edges. And trying to build them that they don't go off the rails too much. I mean, yes, it's a worry. It's not a big worry. Turns out the trolley problem happens almost never in real life. It will never be the case that you will have to choose between a train running over 5 people or running over 1 fat man. Right? I mean, they are contrived. In the real world, things tend to be better. I'm of all the things to worry about, that is a far future worry. I have more things near term to worry about. Now, there are people worrying about that's good, but it's not something I'm paying a lot of attention to.
How about the live situation where there was a missile strike that the computer algorithms picked up? I think it was in the 90s, coming across from well, it would have been.
Yes, this wasn't AI. It's a very dumb sensor system, right? Picked up a fake Russian missile launch.
Yeah, it was the human.
And like nobody died.
No, but it was.
So we did pretty well. I mean, yes, we can invent the science fiction scenario where that goes bad and make a great movie, but it's not real life. And the things to worry about, I think we're pretty good there.
Okay, that's very reassuring. Thank you.
There are very few times I can be reassuring, so I'll take them when I get them.
David has a question.
David, are the authorities collecting so much metadata they can't make any sense of it? No. It turns out making sense of a huge amount of data is the one thing that AIs are good at. Right? Data that's just too much for humans, AIs are great. Boring pattern matching, that's what they do. So no. I mean, there's some talk that you can make it worse for AIs by data poisoning, like giving even more data. It actually doesn't work. With lots of poor quality data, that's what AIs do. ChatGPT is based on lots of poor quality data, and the results are amazing. So it's not going to be our solution. Unfortunately, I kind of wish it was. And Tony has 2 questions. On phones, if you use, so how much a phone tracks you when you've turned off is something we are still debating. The smartphones are in some ways always on, even when they're off to some degree. The dumb phones, when they're off, they're off. So they're not tracking you at all. And I know people will put phones in Faraday cages. They'll basically wrap them in tinfoil. Okay, this is the one instance where I'll tell you to wear a tinfoil hat, not for you, but for your phone. So that works, right? When you wrap your phone in tinfoil, it's a Faraday cage, nothing goes in or out. And we know that works. Probably when your phones are off, they're not tracking you. But the fact that that's unclear speaks to the need for transparency here. I mean, why is it that Apple isn't forced to definitively answer that question? That we just know the answer. And the problem here is a lot of things are opaque, and we just don't know the answer. All right, so another question about a legal authority, the NSA. So the NSA, couple of things. In the US, we still have secret law. So everything I'm saying is based on what I know, but I do believe it to be true. The NSA is not allowed to deliberately track US citizens. But the NSA does inadvertently track US citizens all the time because our data is mixed up with everybody else's data. And if you're spying on China, you're going to get data between New York and California because sometimes it's just easier to route it through China. That's just the way the internet works. So there's a lot of inadvertent collection that the NSA does, that everybody does. And when you do bulk surveillance, you tend to get everything. There are rules about what the NSA has to be able to do with that and how well they follow them. I have no idea. They don't tell me. But there are rules.
I've got a small story on the tracking question. I was recently in New Zealand. I didn't want to spend too much on my BT phone, mobile phone. I switched it off, and still I was able to use Google Maps. It knew where I was, and it told me where to go. How's that possible?
So it's interesting. I don't know. So probably the GPS is still working, right? Your cell is off, but your data might have been on. Kind of have to see it to diagnose it. My guess is your data was on, even though your cell was off. You'll tell when you get your next bill.
Right.
Sorry. But again, speaks to it's hard to control what's going on.
Yeah.
And this is not inadvertently hard. This is deliberately hard. So dark patterns are a thing. And these are deliberately misleading user interfaces where you're forced to click. Okay, so here's an example. I'm all the time, I'm asked on my phone whether I want to let, who is it? I'm trying to remember. There's some company, I think it's Google. It's Google on my computer. Regularly, I get a window. Do you want to share your location with Google? And I click no every time. Once, like 3 weeks ago, I accidentally clicked yes. Now, as far as I know, I am never able to undo that for the rest of my life. That's insane. That's very American. You live in Europe, in the EU, the rules are much better. Like GDPR is a good privacy law, and there were some really powerful suits against companies to take them to task for this sort of thing. But it's very hard for us to control our privacy because companies don't want us to.
I've got another question, Bruce. As the son of a doctor, I've always admired physicians taking the Hippocratic Oath. Do you think the world would be a better place if technologists also took this oath and cared about whether their work benefited humanity or not?
Yeah, I think it would for a lot of reasons. Physicians in the United States, librarians, do not cross librarians. They are incredibly pro-privacy, and they are powerful, and they get angry fast. So, but yes, I think there would be value. In general, right, the moral character of technological work needs to be evaluated. The fact that we're kind of building society for the near-term financial benefit of a bunch of tech billionaires seems crazy, but that's what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing more professional ethics in computer science and programming and technology. I think that would be valuable. It's hard because the money doesn't want it. Yeah. And doing things the money doesn't want is very hard.
Right. Is there a question we missed, David?
So I see David's question. So yes, I think there's a lot of deliberate misinformation from the authorities designed to scare you into accepting surveillance. I see that in the United States whenever potential laws come up protecting the privacy of your phone or location privacy or preventing government from using surveillance cameras without a warrant or IMSI catches without a warrant. There's a whole lot of, right, if you have privacy, you'll all die. I think there's an enormous amount of fear rhetoric that happens. I see it in the US. I'm sure it happens in the rest of the world as well. So Reza asks about surveillance tools. I don't have any good OPSEC advice. It's so dependent on the individual. Who are you? Who you want to be private from? What are your concerns? Right now, Google Ultimate Protection is a phenomenal system, but it gets really hard to use. Apple is introducing new privacy tools, but they will annoy you. And what you do, I think, is very personal. I'll recommend EFF Surveillance Self-Defense. I'll put a link in I'll put the name in the chat. You can Google it. Telling you to Google it. This is a good guide for people for what they should or shouldn't do depending on who they are. But there's nothing I would say that I think everyone should do that. As I said, I play Pokemon Go. I'm no one to talk.
Just wanted to talk about some basic, simple things that you would recommend people do on a daily basis, on emails, buying things.
I have nothing simple. Simple things are make good backups, have antivirus, and have a decent bullshit detector online. Those are the simple things.
not wear glasses, sunglasses, so that the cameras don't pick you.
I mean, if you want to be a weirdo outside, go to it. But I'm not responsible.
Right.
You want to wear sunglasses indoors? Go to town.
What was your second point?
I might have out of order, but good backups on your computer. This is maybe computer hygiene. Good backups, good antivirus program, and actually better, always update your software. Install all updates immediately, and have a good bullshit detector. A lot of stuff that gets us is clicking on bad links or falling for obvious scams.
Yeah, I've got all that. I've got an Apple actually, and it's just brilliant.
I mean, the new scam was got 2 months ago. Someone invented this. Now it's everywhere. So I mean, when these scams show up, they're effective and they decay in effectiveness as we all find out about them. So it happens, you get a text, which is a wrong number, but it's like vaguely interesting. So you write back and say, hey, sorry, this was sent to somebody else. Then you start chatting with them and it's a scam. First time I did it, I responded, hey, this, I think you sent the wrong number. And I wrote back and it was like some pretty girl and I'm supposed to respond. And I thought, okay, this is obviously a scam, but it was pretty good. I was impressed. Now you got them 3 a day for a while. And now they're fading again. There'll be a new tactic in a few months, but you need to have a good bullshit detector.
I delete all emails I don't understand the title of, or which are unsolicited.
Yeah, I can't do that because I'm a famous person.
Oh,
so I get unsolicited emails all the time. That's okay. I mean, that's what I have to do.
Yeah. I mean, and the same with texts. And my other half, I say just delete it. It doesn't matter if it's important. They will get back to you. Does the scams start with, as you said, the little wedge, and then it grows from there, and you just give it a bit more information.
I'm now going to sell you all my timeshare now. You listen to me for an hour. Question was, are VPNs worth it? They might be.
VPNs. Yeah.
I will use a VPN when I'm traveling abroad.
Really?
I will sometimes use a VPN when I'm in public. VPNs are interesting. You have to trust the VPN, and good luck figuring out which VPN to trust. But here's the rule: you have to trust somebody. You have no choice but to trust somebody. You get to pick who you want to trust. Right? You want to trust Apple, you want to trust Google, and everybody wants to give you security except from them. Now, Google will give you a lot of security, but as long as Google can spy on you. Microsoft the same way. But you really deliberately pick and deliberately notice who you're trusting. Don't accidentally trust. But there's no choice but to trust. Right? You got to put your email somewhere.
Yeah.
Right? You can't not put it anywhere.
Yeah.
You got to have a phone in your pocket.
Yeah.
Are you going to use some Mac program? But think about before you use it.
Tony Wills has a question. How is NSA able to infiltrate in Russia?
Say again?
How is NSA does its surveillance in Russia if they don't use Google or Facebook anymore?
So NSA doesn't know. NSA has a larger budget than every intelligence agency in the planet combined. Right? They do everything. If there's a way to spy in Russia, they do it. Exactly how? I don't know. But we know that they infiltrate networks. They passively surveil microwave and satellite. Glomar Explorer. They built a submarine to tap undersea cables. They do all kinds of stuff that would really impress you because they got a scary budget.
Paul DeCourt has a question.
They've got no budget. It's the ceiling. It's the sky.
Now they do have a budget. We know, and we saw some of the budget in the NSA in the Snowden documents, but that's kind of the black budget. It's a lot of it secret. Paul is asking about the American authorities failed to catch multiple shooters. I think we catch multiple shooters all the time. And I don't know any about data. So I don't think we have but we have a problem with guns and shooting, not with knowing who did it. Right? That is not the problem in the US. Knowing who did it is the easy part because they're all basically morons. They're terrible at hiding who they are.
Sorry, I meant, I didn't write that properly. I meant prior to them carried out the crime, you know, identifying that they are likely.
Yeah, thought crime's really hard.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, as a fundamental, and so this is something to think about. You know, how much do we want to penalize thought crime? And in any kind of shooters, the false alarms will kill it. Well, false alarms will overwhelm you. If you have a data system that is going to detect mass shooters, your false alarm rate might be 10,000 to 1. It's probably conservative. Lots of people are just barely not mass shooters, way more than are. You will not be able to tell the difference. So now what do you do? It's really hard. It's really, really hard. Problem of mass shooting is not going to be surveillance. It's going to be getting rid of guns. But we live in the US, so that's not going to happen.
We've got two last questions.
All right, two final questions. I see them. What role should the UN have in internet governance, privacy, security? So to me, the UN is an international organization that pushes norms, that really works for government and governance. So I want to see the UN active in nation-state cyber weapons, both surveillance and offensive. You know, what are the rules of the road here? You know, what kind of norms should we be pushing government? I want the UN to be active in sort of the mismatch between technology makers and technology takers. Right? Most of the planet has no say in the technologies that run their lives. And they come out of US corporations, they come out of Silicon Valley, they come out of, you know, libertarian male white tech bros, and they're forced on the rest of the world. I want that power balance changed, and I think the UN can really serve there. And I think those are really important. I mean, right now, there's no organization with the regulatory footprint to match Facebook. Right? Facebook has more users than Christianity. How do we deal with that? That's not going to be something any country can solve. That needs international cooperation, international organization. And I think the UN is best positioned there. Richard says about the genie is out of the bottle. I don't buy that defeatist logic. I mean, I think we can, and we are incumbent to regulate big tech. Big tech wants you to think that it's too late. For the rest of the history of our species, surveillance is inevitable. I don't think that's true. I think we get to decide. And just because we've abdicated our decision-making responsibility and let big tech decide the world they want to build, right? The world designed for the near-term financial interests of a bunch of companies, doesn't mean we're stuck with that way of organizing society for the rest of humanity. And we can decide to change that. But we can decide that people need to be in charge, not billionaires. And I think we should. I mean, I think we will eventually. You know, sooner is better than later.
Okay. Two last questions. To know
all right, this is the last question. What data has been collected on participants in the discussion? Don't know. I don't know what Zoom collects, but certainly, you know, all our accounts, probably your IP address as well. So kind of where you are. Reza asks about a programming language question, which will interest nobody else in this discussion. So writing secure code is a huge problem that language is not going to magically solve. It's basically economic. We don't want to pay for secure code. It'll double or triple the cost of our software, and we're unwilling to pay for it. So with exceptions like the space shuttle, you get lousy code that just barely works. So think of it more as an economic problem than a technology problem. Lots of technologies, but there's no business incentive to use them.
Well, thank you very much. With that, and with your answer to UN and the genie out of the bottle.
All right. I'm going to be home recovering from COVID, but so far I feel great. But I can tell you, I canceled 9 in-person events for this week alone. And that was sad.
Is that your first time you got the COVID?
No, it's my second.
Oh. Well, Bruce, thank you very much. We enjoyed the talk. Thank you very much for your time.
All right. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks. Big clap. Thank you very much.
Thank you and good night.